Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining me. Thank you even more for being interested in your own psychology, because that is what inspires me. I was asked that question this week, and that's what came up. What inspires me is ultimately what inspires me is hill sprints. The feeling that I get after I do hill sprints are a really great pull-up workout. I found out yesterday I can still do 22 pull-ups. I inspired myself by that. Any sort of inspiration that doesn't come from either pull-ups or hill sprints is a delusion, except for what truly inspires me, of course, which is people caring about their own psychologies. People really taking the time to look out at their lives and consider, well, maybe I'm the cause of all this. Not only am I the cause of all this, but I'm willing to do the work necessary to look at my issues to figure out what's going on. Maybe I am the problem, and I do know what's going on with you, generally. Oh boy, this light is not on me there. More light on me. Much better show. Show just increased exponentially in quality. I mean, I do know what's wrong with you is, look, you have things about you that you're hiding, maybe from yourself. Not usually so much from yourself, usually from other people. How do you take what you're hiding and make it useful for other people? That's the key. Yeah, you're your problem, but that's the problem. And here at Animus, right, we go through exactly what you could be hiding, exactly what your issues are. They're the same for everybody. They just manifest in different ways, and exactly how to talk through those issues to start with, so you can learn how to take those issues and share them in a better way. I know there's a lot of negative connotation around sharing issues, especially for men, because we don't want to come off as needy or whiny. No, that's what happens when you try to share issues, when you don't process the issues, when you aren't aware of what's going on, yet you still try to communicate it. Then it going to come off as needy, whiny. Complaining is just, oh, here's this anxiety I don't know how to handle. So I'm just going to kind of have this side pressure release valve thing. I'm going to let you deal with it somehow. But the ultimate cause is I'm hiding it. I'm not comfortable with this anxiety. I mean, it goes to what I was talking about this week. I just want to make an official apology for this week's video, the one that I released on Wednesday. Man, I don't know. I just was not feeling that great. Boy, you should have seen me on Monday, though. It was way worse. But yeah, I really phoned in that video. Maybe I won't do a re-record, but essentially what I was saying is, look, if you're very similar to what I was talking about with Joe a couple weeks ago on the podcast, this show, what are you working towards? Are you working towards getting more in touch with reality? Are you working towards really doing the thing that you need to do? Or are you working towards protecting yourself? And maybe if you get that thing done, then okay, that'll be good too. Well, guess what? If you're hiding, if you're uncomfortable with certain parts of yourself, then you will be working to protect those parts of yourself. And you'll wonder why things won't work out. You'll wonder why you keep beating your head against the wall. Well, because you're trying to protect this thing about you. I don't know what that is. That can take many. I do know what it is, generally speaking, but concretely, it can take a bunch of different forms. Yeah, maybe it's a certain realization. Maybe it's a certain fact about you. Maybe you're just not comfortable expressing emotion. Okay, so I'm going to go in this situation, and I'm going to try to get what I want. I'm going to try to get my needs met, while at the same time, I'm not going to express any anger, or I'm not even going to let myself get angry. And when I do it alone in my room, and I do the thing where I punch the pillow. So yeah, things are just going to be very difficult for you. And all the take responsibility, all the work hard, all the keep your notes to the grindstone, it's going to get you nowhere. Well, no, it's going to get you worse than nowhere. Yeah. And then your mind just ends up being, your psychology ends up being, and you end up acting like a government bureaucracy. Is the bureaucracy trying to help, or is it trying to protect itself? Well, it's trying to do both. But to what extent is it doing the other versus the other? It's difficult to do both, right? So an agency that would really try to help, it's constantly changing, it's constantly growing. Oh, we started this wing last year, or we started this faction last year. Oh, that's not working. It's got to go over here. It's got, it just keeps moving and adapting. But just typical government bureaucracies don't usually work like that. And, separation from our parents, like issues with our parents, trying to cover up issues there. I think that's a huge part of it now. I mean, the Oedipal issue is huge. And I think you see it coming out. Boy, I promised myself I wasn't going to talk about COVID-19, but here we go. But you see it a lot. Yeah, I talked about it a couple weeks ago. You see it coming out with people's reaction to COVID-19. They want government to protect them. They want other people to just figure it out and do it for them. And I think these are revealing separation issues that we have from our own parents. It's very difficult to live the life that you want to live when you do not separate from the parents. But the mistake that people make about this as well. I moved away. I'm no longer living with my parents. Oh, maybe my parents are even dead. Oh, I got in a big fight with my parents. They know what I think. I'm separated. Well, are you really? Because the thing about separation, true, honest separation, it doesn't come from physically separating. It usually doesn't come through a fight. Ironically, paradoxically, seemingly paradoxically, when you don't understand psychology, it comes from creating a better connection with your parents. What? That's weird. So you want me to separate from my parents, yet create a better connection with them? Yeah, because it's about you developing your own boundary. Yeah, separation and connection, maybe that doesn't mean that much. It really comes down to you developing your own boundary, your own sense of identity. And you will have your own boundary. You'll have your own identity to the extent that you're no longer hiding anymore. And if you're hiding things from your parents, if you got in a huge blow-up fight with your parents about something, or if you just moved away and you had issues with your mom or your dad, well, I'm just going to move away and forget about it. Well, if you still don't want them to know things about you, well, that's going to come up in other areas of your life. And especially, I say this all the time, tell me what you think about your father, and I'll tell you what you think about the world. Tell me what you think about your mother, I'll tell you what you think about relationships. I mean, these things follow you around. I mean, I don't know, does it make sense? It is. It simply is. Does fashion make sense? It is. You better pay attention to fashion to some extent, even if it's like I'm just going to be the guy who wears flannel. Like that's paying attention to it to some degree. And these things, they are real. They are there. I think you guys are a little bit, tuned into it, but I just want to be the guy who wakes you up and says, yeah, fashion really matters. And if you don't pay some attention to it, you're going to look ridiculous. And you're going to go into a bunch of situations and things won't work out. And it may have something, but maybe something seemingly small. Like, well, why would you wear that shirt in a job interview? What are you thinking? Why would you wear those pants? Why would you wear that outfit out on a date? Is it everything? No, but you got to pay attention to these things. And if you don't, these issues with your mom, these issues with your dad, these separation issues that inform ultimately your own boundary, they're just going to keep coming up over and over. Things will not work out and you'll think it's something out there. But really it's you. Oh, I'm going to get a manual on setting goals. I'm going to read a positive psychology book and I'm going to do my affirmations and goal setting, which I think is totally helpful. But go back to my video on, why you're not reaching your goals. Because you're not who you need to be. Because you haven't developed the boundary. Goals don't care about your explicit goals. They care about who you are. Right? Really who you are. And if you think you're reaching a goal, you're just trying to cover up for the fact that you have these things about you that you don't want people to know or you don't want to be exposed, then, man, it's just going to be, very difficult for you. I mean, very difficult for all of us. Yeah. I mean, you can't really have a connection with somebody. I'm going back to your parents. You can't really have a connection with somebody without separating from them. I mean, that's what the connection is. It's in a way, there's independence, there's dependence, and then there's interdependence. And it's scary to go to the place of interdependence where you're really communicating about where the other person is and where you are. But in order to do that, you really need to define your boundary, in a very good way, in a very solid way. So then once you're removed from that situation, become independent again, then, you have your own boundary. It's, I know I talked about this, but people say something to the effect of, man, wouldn't it be great if there was a gym you could go to and work out your psychology? Like, I know how to get in shape because there's a gym for doing that. Oh man, wouldn't it be great if there was a gym just for your psychology, just so a place I could go to work out my boundary? It is. Or there is a gym. It's called your family. It's called your closest relationships. That's where you go work out. I mean, these people who, of course, are going to bother you the most, or anybody else you're bothered by. Maybe an authority figure. Maybe, an intimate relationship. That's the therapy, or that's the psychology gym. Where you're, the strength, really, of your boundary, of your emotional literacy is really challenged the most. That's where you do it. Well, this week, we're going to talk about how to do that maybe in a more specific way. Last week I was talking about the philosophy of Carl Jung's psychological types, MBTI. This week I'm going to give you definite workouts you could do for each type, or for each type. I mean, I'm not going to go through all 16 MBTI, but I'll go through introversion, extroversion, sensing, intuitive, just the main ones that Jung talks about. And this goes back to what I was talking about 2 weeks ago, last week. Your type is not really your type. Maybe it is to some degree. I know neuroticism is because I can see that in your brain. I can look at the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the HPA axis. And I can say, okay, this person is probably going to be more neurotic based on not just the activation of the HPA, but how the prefrontal cortex not inhibits it, but works with it. Right? You can't just tell by the activation of the HPA, because there's people who have very little HPA activation but aren't very neurotic. It's not just about the prefrontal cortex and how that soothes or regulates or controls the HPA. It's about how they work together. Another indication that the mind-body dichotomy is false. So your neuroticism may be real, but any other personality archetype is essentially a symptom that we notice. And the MBTI, these are a bunch of symptoms. These are a bunch of adaptive mechanisms that you have adapted, you've developed for whatever bunch of reasons. Who cares? And even if some of it is biological, it doesn't matter. What are you going to do to get better? Well, here's what you do. I mean, if you're introverted, the 3 things that you need to focus on for self-awareness, for making the unconscious conscious, right? I know you're a problem. There's parts of your unconscious that you don't like being conscious. That's where the neurosis stems from. Well, how do we make that unconscious, or how do we make that unconscious conscious? Yeah, that's self-awareness. If you're introverted, 3 things: group therapy. The introvert hates group therapy. I've often heard this. Oh, well, I don't want to go to group because that's uncomfortable. I would be okay talking about these issues just one-on-one, but in a group setting, that would be uncomfortable for me. I would feel inhibited. All you're telling me is, that's what I need to do because I'm so uncomfortable doing it. I don't like doing push-ups because I'm bad at them. Gee, that may be a good indication that it's time for you to do push-ups, unless you're a marathoner where you don't really need upper body strength, or a cyclist, which then the metaphor breaks down. But if you're introverted, if you turn inward to solve your issues, well, boy, I think a great way to grow for you would be to go to group therapy and maybe not focus on yourself for once. Well, you are focusing on yourself, not directly, of course. I mean, these things aren't mutually exclusive. You go to group therapy, you see somebody else's issues in yourself. So you are focusing on yourself by focusing on somebody else, and you are focusing on somebody else by focusing on yourself. Again, these things aren't mutually exclusive, but at least it helps you to, right? Archetypes are where to go on the map, and the personality is how you get there. It's developing your car. It's just making your car more resilient. So if you're introverted, group therapy. Get more experience outside of you. I mean, if you're introverted, you're probably not growing by staying in your apartment. Now, it doesn't mean you maybe need to literally leave your apartment, but COVID, whatever, we're all on shutdown, online groups, connecting with people online. I think that there's a lot of things that you can do to develop and grow just by going online. And obviously just building relationships. Oh, I needed to take some time for myself. Well, depends. It depends on what your pattern has been, but a lot of people who are just perpetual introverts, you just want to be comfortable. Relationships, intimacy, letting other people see you, seeing other people, which may be even more uncomfortable because then you don't feel special. You know, you can't go into your introverted little hole where you feel special and you are totally in control. A lot of growth for you is going to be outside of you, group, relationships, leaving the apartment. For extroverts, I think journaling can be really helpful about your own thoughts and your own emotions. Stop talking about other people and what's going on outside of you. Focus on you. What is really going on with you? Isolation, one-on-one therapy. I mean, for the extrovert, it's just to get him to just focus on what's going on with him, because everything is just a reflection. I mean, you are focused on yourself, but really to go to the root of the issue, it's just painful. And I often see when somebody isn't an extrovert, right, but adapted to extroversion, I'll ask them about themselves, and it's like instantly talk about something else. How are you feeling today? They'll immediately start talking about somebody else in their life, the news. Well, here's what's going on. You got to talk about you. I know it's painful, but you got to talk about you, your thoughts, your feelings. For somebody who is, one-on-one therapy, more isolation, read more books. For somebody who's sensing, very good at looking at what is, I mean, this is where journaling can really be helpful. I mean, journaling is helpful for everybody. It's just what kind of journaling would you do? And for journaling, just asking, if you're sensing, asking why. Well, this is what I feel. Why? Well, because of this. Why? Just why 3 or 4 times to just get to the root of it. Stop taking everything at face value. It's not helping. You're not growing. You got to look at these things from a different perspective. You have to develop more intuition, well, intuitive as it means in the context of the MBTI and how Jung meant it. This is when it's really important, if you're strong sensing, especially, to ask yourself what you're avoiding, what do you need. Sensing people are great at just looking at, how things feel, what's going on the surface. But they have a very difficult time delving down to, what could be the possible cause of this? Again, what am I avoiding? What do I need? Detailed inquiry. I talk about this in Man's Guide to Psychology. What happened? What's my reaction to what happened? I mean, this is one of the loops that we get to in the one-on-one therapy that I do. It can be super helpful. What happened? What was my reaction? Then what happened? What was somebody else's reaction? Then what was my reaction? Right? You just keep going through these things, analyzing them, not just reacting to, especially the surface level phenomenon of what is happening. And something else that I talk about in Man's Guide to Psychology is sentence completion. Also very important for sensing. Again, it's just about getting deeper with, if you're just like paying attention to the surface, I think that's really important, of course. But if that's all you do, you're not really going to create the kind of awareness that you need to grow. I mean, it's like, just go back to the car analogy. You have a car that's a really fast top end in the 4,000 to 5,000 RPM range, but really slow low end. Okay, well, you're going to suffer. You need to develop the low end. Now, in the car analogy, it doesn't work out so well because I think, I don't know exactly how cars work, but if you have a really fast top end, you're going to necessarily have a lower slow end. But thankfully, our psychology is not like that. It's not mutually exclusive. Right? By understanding the deeper causes to these things, your sensing is going to be activated in a more genuine way. By going through why 3 or 4 times, you're going to get different sensations, which plays to your adaptive strength. By asking yourself what you're avoiding, what you need, seeing these things on a deeper level, right? Like what the sensing has going for him is will be able to sense those deeper levels and he'll be able to make them more real, which is vital. The intuitive This is one that's really important. I know this doesn't make any sense to the intuitive. It doesn't make any sense to me. That's what I am. That's how I've adapted myself. Excuse me. Is to ask yourself the affect. Like the affect. This is part of the one-on-one therapy, but if I'm working with someone and I see them more sensing that I don't focus on it so much, but how does the emotion feel? Share how that makes you feel. The typical terrible therapist question, but that's really important. Okay, so that's anger. How does the anger feel? Where do you feel it? What is the sensation? Is it in your neck? Is it in your chest? Is it in your head? What's it like? What's it like to just sit with that anger? I mean, this is part of the acclimation. I go back to things I know what your problem is. You're hiding things that you don't, right? Yeah, you don't want things about you to be exposed. And, you go watch a movie, you go watch Good Will Hunting or some Alfred Hitchcock movie, and it's always like, oh, a deep insight, or, oh, a traumatic memory. And then the memory flashes in the hero's mind and they're cured. Well, sometimes it's that, sure. Usually doesn't happen that quickly. But sometimes it's just, well, there are certain feelings I'm uncomfortable having. So the intuitive really needs to focus on the affect of the feeling. But again, not mutually exclusive. The more you can focus on the affect, on how an emotion feels, the better you're going to be at doing what the intuitive is good at, which is asking yourself, figuring out, where does this emotion come from? Bringing up these physical sensations right to the surface. Asking yourself, what am I thinking now? Just what am I feeling now? Just going about your day. I mean, the intuitive will get lost, deep in thought. Oh, what's that connection there? Oh, I'm looking at this tree. How does it relate to this other tree? Is this a redwood or is it something else? It's obviously a conifer, right? But just completely outside of your own sensing. Is not in, the typical expression is not in your body. But you need that for the awareness. Because that could be something you're hiding. And if you're hiding that, then boy, things are going to be really difficult for you. Okay, so I'm going to go about my life, but I'm going to hide certain affects from people. Well, things are going to get difficult for you. It's just, you're making life way more, difficult than it needs to be. And then when it comes to journaling for the intuitive, this is typically not what you want to tell people when it comes to journaling, but it can be helpful. Somebody's deeply intuitive to just take stock of what happened today. Just write out what happened. And I think this is something great for therapy. Just sit down with somebody else, especially introverted intuitive. Just sit down with somebody else and tell them about what they did that day. Nothing else. Know their thought, know their connection. Just, here was my day. Oh, is it boring? I don't know. Maybe it's boring, or maybe you're just uncomfortable talking about that. Why? Why are you uncomfortable? Again, this brings up the affect. It's something that the intuitive is a very difficult time with. The intuitive is great. I love you guys because that's me, obviously, but we can really lose a lot. We can lose a lot of awareness and just not being just comfortable with the sensations of things, with what's going on, with what is. It's always about something else. It's always about making some kind of connection, looking at something deeper in our heads, as the expression goes. And then the thinking, this is somewhat similar to intuitive. Jung thought these were strongly related, but just sitting with your emotions, allowing yourself to feel emotions, and expressing emotions. Understanding that, look, just viscerally, you have emotions, and it's okay to express that. It's only not okay to express that if you think that reveals some weakness in you. And of course, it will reveal a weakness in you if you're not comfortable expressing emotions. Then when you do, it comes off as weird, and then you're complaining, whining, and then you're in control of certain affects that you're afraid of other people seeing. But if you're too strong thinking, then of course you're going to be more likely to do that, right? So you want to hide it because you're afraid of it, but then the more you hide it, the more you want to hide it because it's going to affect you negatively, or you're out of control with it. But the more you hide it, the more out of control you're going to be. It just becomes a negative feedback loop. And then feeling, this is when it's really helpful to analyze emotions. Again, keep asking why. Where's this emotion coming from? I mean, the unconscious map. I mean, probably 80-85% of my clients are men, but I think the women that are my clients, the unconscious map especially, has been more helpful for them, because women tend to be feeling, so just to take them through their emotional lives from a conceptual framework, it gets them to see it in a completely different way. And of course, it doesn't disabuse the feeling at all, but it just helps them with the feeling. And then judging, perceiving, I don't think these are real attributes. I think judging is just somebody who's more accustomed to deductive reasoning, perceiving somebody who's more accustomed to inductive reasoning. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. But judging, hey, you need more free time. Got to give yourself more free time. Perceiving, opposite, you need more to-do list. So I hope that was helpful, just to give some practical advice to what I was talking about last week, because I just thought last week was like really abstract, and I think it can't be helpful to understand the types from that perspective. Well, no, I know it is helpful, but you got to apply these things. Take your type, reverse it, do the opposite, and that's how you are going to integrate. That's how you're going to grow in a healthier way. And those are some good ways to do that. All right, we got some questions here. This one, the one I didn't get to a couple weeks ago, this is about values and the emotion maps, the anxiety and anger maps. So, I talk about confronting anxiety. How do you handle anxiety in the proper way? Well, you confront what you're avoiding. You confront the thing that you're avoiding, but you do it in a way that helps other people. But doesn't this imply that people have similar values? But what if you don't have similar values? I would say ultimately that this is a question for philosophy. When it comes down to philosophy, should a woman go back to an abusive relationship, or man, psychologically abusive? Well, no, but that's a philosophical question. It's the question of psychology to determine how do we relate with ourselves to come to what I would say would be more proper philosophical insights. And I think if somebody does keep going back to an abusive relationship, it's not because that's their chosen value. It's because they have at the base of it, a warped psychology. I think when you work on the psychology properly and you really get somebody to interact with somebody else in a way that is truly based on their values as a human, I don't think these are social constructs. I think there is some wiggle room there. I mean, they're contextual, but that doesn't mean maybe somebody would like being in an abusive relationship. And in a way I understand that, of course, they do like it in the same way that a drug addict likes his heroin. But is that what you really like? These things are elucidated through understanding your psychology more. But I would say on another level, I mean, there's a lot of talk about multicultural counseling. I mean, I think it's just... what's it? I mean, it doesn't lead anywhere, because most people from different cultures have different or have very similar values, abstractly speaking. We want good relationships with authority, and we want good relationships. We want intimacy, and we want authority. We want to be productive, and we want to create relationships with people. Now, how we exactly go about doing that does depend on the culture, but I only care about what do you want overall. And so, yeah, I understand what you're saying. So there's always the case of the suicide bomber. I mean, is he confronting, you're not asking this, right? But is he confronting his anxiety when he blows up a bunch of people and himself? Yeah, I think he is, but I also think his psychology is so warped at that point that his blowing himself up probably feels somewhat similar to you going on a job interview or you giving a speech in public. But if the suicide bomber was in my clinic, I wouldn't talk to him about his faith or anything. I would ask him, what else are you avoiding? What's going on? Where are some things where you're not becoming more autonomous? And just by working through those issues, then the values reveal themselves. I know we talk about that in the book a lot. Action reveals values. And a lot of times when people have these values that look strange from the outside, like, you're a suicide bomber, or you're a drug addict, or you're going back to this abusive relationship, it's because you haven't taken action. That's because you've just been closing off part of yourselves, letting other people decide what you want to do. And then the suicide bombing, the going back to the abusive relationship, the addiction, that is a result of continuing to shut down. You go to a psychologist, you go to a therapist, they're supposed to work on you with these internal processes so you can begin to act and make decisions for yourself. And I think in that context, everybody, just in general, comes to mostly, again, the right contextual premises. But as far as those, contextual values. But as far as really nailing down those specific values, then I think that's the domain of philosophy, which is closely related to psychology. Like I think being rational is a great value to have. I don't talk about that. I mean, it's an implied part of my book, I hope. Because I hope my theories are somewhat in line with reality. I think that's what rationality is. But you just can't talk to somebody about how it's important to be rational. It doesn't work that way. You have to work on the psychological mechanisms behind it, and then once you do that, I know you're going to be more likely to be rational. You're going to be less likely to be a suicide bomber. Go back to the abusive relationship. Use drugs destructively. Drugs are fine, just how do you use them? That's the issue. So what I'm trying to say here is, based on the nature of psychology and philosophy, what these two things are, theoretically at least, you'd be able to work on your psychology enough, and from doing that, it will lead you in at least the right direction of a proper philosophy. And conversely, working on a proper philosophy, really understanding that, will lead you to proper conclusions about your psychology, right? Philosophy is how you relate with the world. Psychology is how you relate with yourself. Very much introverted, extroverted. So when you relate with the world better, you relate with yourself better. So, I think one test for a proper unified theory of psychology is, does it lead you to a helpful philosophy necessarily when you begin to work on the issues as detailed by the unified theory? So we will see if that is happening with my theory. This next question, this guy is feeling jealous about a zero-sum situation. So two zero-sum situations that I think there's probably more, but the two most prominent ones are women and status. I mean, status is zero-sum, either you're higher status or lower status. If you're higher status socially, then other people are lower status. And with women, I mean, if some guy gets a girlfriend, that's one less girl for you to get. And this guy is feeling specifically jealous. He doesn't go into detail about a status situation, which is definitely zero-sum. And he's wondering how to manage these issues. Well, I would manage these issues the same way I would manage a guy who says, well, I'm jealous that this guy has this girlfriend. Yeah, this girl who I want, he made her his girlfriend, and now she can't be my girlfriend. I'm jealous about this. And my challenge to that guy would be, are you really jealous about that? The truth is that when you really start to work on yourself and your psychology, I mean, there's 50 girls, 100 girls out there for any guy who has his life together. So I'm wondering if it really is about that girl, or is it's just about deeper issues of being unable to get your needs met that are triggered by this girl situation or this status situation. Right now you focus on that, right? So you have all these emotional issues, these unmet needs, this anger, and now you're trying to what you're ultimately doing now. Right, you're not trying to interact with the world in the best way possible. Now you're like the CDC. Now you're trying to act to justify the anger. So you're going to be much more likely to pick out zero-sum situations and go, oh, he has that girl, or oh, he has that status. He won the student class president. I'm the secretary. He has more status than I am. I'm jealous. Yeah, are you really jealous of that situation? Or Are you just trying to think of a way to be jealous because you've done a really poor job up until this point of getting your needs met? Not in that one situation, but in a bunch of situations, but you're just focusing on the zero-sum situation to justify the jealousy. I mean, that's really important. When you really start getting your issues together, like some girls are just not going to like you. It doesn't matter how, whatever. But it's not about that, right? It's just about putting yourself in the best possible situation so you can get girls in your life, generally speaking. You can gain status in your life, generally speaking. Otherwise, I think you're focusing on zero-sum situations to justify. Yes, I mean, guys learn that most situations are not zero-sum. Okay, that's great. You learn that. I'm slightly less jealous now. I'm slightly less bitter or resentful because of that, but I still have this jealousy. I still have this bitterment, this resentment, this anger I'm holding on to, this anger I'm not managing in a proper way. I still need to justify that. So, I'm gonna use my brain to focus on the situations that I do know are zero sum, like status and women. And I've got a final question here. Yeah, this will be the last one. So with the quarantine now, with the COVID-19, people are staying home, and maybe one of the fears is, well, this listener heard this fear from somebody else. Are we going to become habituated to staying home? Just because we're staying home, is taking part in an action enough to change us and make us habituated to staying home? I would say no, unless staying home for you is a way for you to gratify latent emotional issues. So let's say you just had a bunch of anxiety from going out to work, and but before you had to leave the house every day, and this anxiety got triggered. You never dealt with the anxiety for what it really is. You kept projecting it out and saying, oh, it's this thing, oh, it's the government, it's my dad. I have all these conspiracy theories about it. Then you're ordered to stay home for a month. Now you're not just going to have the habit of staying home for a month, but now you're going to glob all this anxiety around staying home for the month, and it's going to be deeply gratifying for you, and you're going to be more likely to want to stay home. But it's not the habit that does it. I mean, just like changing your habits does not change your behavior usually, unless there's no emotional laden issues there. But if there are emotionally laden issues there, then just changing the action is not going to change the behavior. It does it for a short term, and this is one of the many reasons why CBT, while it is useful in some contexts, is not overall effective. Because, just changing the behavior doesn't necessarily tease out the latent emotional issues, and that's why the behavior was there in the first place, of course, to justify those emotional issues. So it's like you're just not dealing with the problem for what it is. So will this quarantine make people habituated to staying home? Only if staying home for them was gratifying to their emotional issues that they didn't know how to handle and kept on being triggered by going out in the world. This all comes back to you managing your issues. To what extent is your unconscious conscious, and to what extent do you use that unconscious in a productive way once you do make it conscious? But usually, when a habit is ingrained, it's not usually a habit. It's become ingrained for a reason. I mean, somebody doesn't have any emotional issues or any serious emotional issues. They're usually, they don't do the same thing over and over again. So when I see somebody doing the same thing over and over again, I can pretty much assume that it's become emotionally ingrained because of latent issues. I mean, even if the habit is constructive. Even if it's a useful habit. I mean, okay, so even a useful habit, I mean, there's still better ways of doing something. You get a habit that's useful and you keep adapting, you keep trying out new things. If somebody just goes, okay, this is the way we're doing it, this is how we're going to keep doing it, right? That was Ford, right? That was GM. They became habituated in their way of doing things, justified by the neurosis of certain political actions from the federal government. We're not going to get into that now, but habit's just not the norm. habit would not be the norm for a being capable of conceptual thinking, a being capable of understanding the world, taking it in new ways, developing new ideas based on new information and changing, constantly adapting. It wouldn't be the norm. I mean, it's the norm for a turtle, right? A turtle needs really good habits, needs really good fixed action patterns, and that is a part of humanity. But we have these other capabilities too. These other capabilities that, when exercised, are inherently non-habitual. So yeah, I mean, if this quarantine, if the question is, if this quarantine is making you like staying home, then it wasn't the quarantine that did it. There were emotions there, and the quarantine was now an excuse to keep doing this, to keep staying home. All right. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe. Animus at animusempire.com. If you have any more questions, or, just reach out on Twitter, that's fine too. And animusempire.com/schedule. We do free 30-minute consultations. Right? What was I talking about at the beginning of this? You got to reach out. You got to reach out and connect to make the unconscious conscious, to make parts of you that you're hiding, that you're uncomfortable with, that you don't want to see, maybe you don't want other people to see. If you want your life to go in a better direction, you got to make that stuff useful. You got to make all that junk useful. And here at Animus, we have a definite process for doing exactly that. But even taking the first step, reaching out, making a free consultation appointment, step in the right direction. I'll leave it there. Thank you. And I wish you, of course, joy and pain that comes from being in touch with reality.